Want to build your SaaS product quickly but don't have a big budget? In this video, I'm going to walk you through different tools and techniques you can use to build your SaaS product without breaking the bank. We'll start by ranking a number of techniques by tiers, with expert tier being the highest and C tier being the lowest. Then we'll talk through the differences between building core SaaS application features and user features. And finally, we'll talk through different ways of coding a product, including numerous approaches to vibe coding and using companions and starter kits. Let's talk about different ways that you can get version 1 of your application developed in a fairly inexpensive way. The first is hiring a freelancer. A freelancer is oftentimes going to be a cheaper option than going with a firm, and if they've done the types of development that you want before, they can oftentimes come in with an existing code base or existing solutions and from other projects and apply those to your project. So hiring an experienced freelancer, I'm going to give that an A tier. Next, we have vibe coding from scratch. Vibe coding from scratch means that you're just going in with really like very little plan, and you're just telling the vibe coding tool, build me an app that does A, B, and C, and D. And with that, you can get it done faster than hand coding something, but it is going to still be fairly slow. I'm going to give that a C tier. If you're enjoying this video, please make sure to like and subscribe. It helps me know what type of content you want more of. Next, we have white label SaaS. So this is really dependent on what you're trying to build. If you don't need full control of implementing custom features, if the white label product like Go High Level or whatever other white label SaaS product allows you to come in and build something for the audience that you're targeting fairly quickly, it can allow you to get V1 out fast. The unfortunate side of it is that if you need to do a bunch of custom stuff, it doesn't support that. But since we're focused on moving fast and getting V1 of a product out inexpensively, I'm going to give this an expert tier, but your mileage may vary. Next up, we have a vibe coding with a text or code-based companion. I'm going to go ahead and give this a B tier. And so this is a great mechanism for getting started building something. I think if you use a companion, and you can come in and give it guidelines as to what it needs to build for payment integration or authentication or whatever it is that you have a companion for, it allows you to move fairly fast. And so I'm going to give that a B tier. Next, we have hiring a firm. Hiring a firm is a good idea because oftentimes firms bring a ton of experience, except because we're trying to rank based on moving fast and inexpensively, I'm going to go ahead and give this a B tier. Next up, we have hand coding. Hand coding is just basically trying to build something from scratch, whether you're a technical founder or a non-technical founder. If you're building something from scratch, especially if it's a new framework that you've never used before, this is one of the slowest ways to move. And it's going to be inexpensive, but it's just also going to be super time consuming, and time is money. So I'm going to give this a C tier. Next up, we have vibe coding with a companion and a PRD. So if you have text or code-based vibe coding companions and you have a detailed PRD, this is an excellent way to move faster. Of course, you need somebody that knows how to use these vibe coding tools and interpret the code and be able to manage the development lifecycle. But if you have all of that in place, then I'm going to go ahead and give this an A tier. It's a fairly fast way of moving in and building V1 of your product. Next, we have vibe, just generally like vibe coding with a PRD, but without any kind of companions or starter kits or anything like that. I'm going to go ahead and give this a B tier. Next up, we have what's called a concierge MVP. A concierge MVP is where you're actually not building anything. And I highly recommend this to start figuring out if you can make money before you even build a product. It's where you just go in and manually do something for someone while you're building the product. They may see demos of the product as you're building it, but the concierge MVP is a way of proving the value proposition of what you want to build without actually building anything. So it could be that you're just doing calls with somebody or manually doing some task for them or creating spreadsheets to manage everything. So I think this is a fantastic way of getting started with V1 of proving your business model, not necessarily building your product, but I'm going to go ahead and give that an expert tier. It's definitely something you should consider. Next up, we have a starter kit. So a starter kit is basically an existing code base that has all of the core, like 80% of the functionality that you need to get started building an application. And that is alongside, any of these other A tier things. A starter kit is going to be an expert level type of thing that allows you to move super fast. It gives you 80% of what you need to get started with your application, and then you just kind of build your features on top of that. So it's better than a white label SaaS because you don't have to you're not beholden to what the white label SaaS product offers in terms of functionality. You can kind of customize and build whatever features you want, but it gives you 80% of the V1 launch out of the box. Next, we have finding a tech co-founder or bringing in a tech co-founder. If you are a non-technical person, I'm going to give this an A tier. This is one of the fastest ways to get up and running and just have somebody else that you're potentially giving some equity, and they're coming in and helping you build V1 of your product and manage the technical aspects of things. So that's an A tier. And then finally, we have hiring your niece or nephew, just basically hiring some random person that has some basic development experience. This is probably one of the worst things you can do is just bring in somebody random because they know how to code a few things. They've no track record or history of actually developing anything. They're not familiar with your tech stack, and potentially, they're just going to go in the wrong direction or pick the wrong technologies, and it's going to cause a huge headache and take way longer than you think. So that's my assessment of some of the most common things that people consider for building V1 of a product at a low cost. If you're looking for a super fast way to build your SaaS product, then check out our free SaaS starter kit. It helps you build and launch your SaaS product much faster than trying to hand code it or vibe code it from scratch. You can either install it and use it as a starting point by building your own features on top of it, or you can import it into an existing project and use it as a vibe coding companion. People love it because it has a ton of SaaS best practices baked in that you don't have to figure out yourself. You can grab it at user-growth.com, and I'll put a link in the description below. So the first thing I want to talk about is the difference between what I call core SaaS features and application-specific SaaS features. So your core SaaS features are things like authentication, billing, plan management, quota management, teams and users, notifications, file uploads, just all the things that you find in pretty much every SaaS product or most SaaS products, give or take a little bit. And then you have your application specific features. So these are going to be things that are unique to your product. So if you're a video service or an AI model or an API service, these are going to be your own custom AI models or APIs or whatever it is that you build. If you have an accounting software or a chat interface, those are going to be your specific features that you're building. Typically, those will sit inside of some sort of dashboard, some sort of admin UI for most SaaS products. And then all of the authentication, billing, and plan management, quota management, those are usually kind of hidden in the settings screens or the user settings or profile screens. In an application specific features, you have custom reports or business rules or business logic, things that are related to helping your customers solve the problem that you're trying to help them solve. So the core features are things that are common across most SaaS apps, and the application specific features are things that are unique to your app. So when you're building V1 of your product, what happens is that the core features really end up being around 80% of the work that you have to do to get the product launched. And then the rest of the work ends up being about 20% of the work that you have to build. And this is for V1, obviously. So once you get the first version of your product launched, then after that, it flips and you end up spending significantly more time building application specific features because you already have all of this stuff in place: authentication, quota management, all that stuff. So you have to, that's kind of the bar. You have to have that set of functionality in place and to get you up and running. And then once it's in place, you don't really have to mess with it too much. You might tweak it a little bit here or there, add some capabilities, but then it flips, and then you're spending like 95% of your time continuing to do application specific development after you get your product launched. But that first version, that first launch, is really where it ends up being that 80%, where you're really spending most of your time getting all these core SaaS features in place, and then 20% of your time doing application specific functionality. So now let's talk about the different ways that you can actually build your SaaS product. So building V1 of your SaaS product, there's a few ways you can approach it. And I'm going to start here from the top. And these are going to be kind of the slowest or most time consuming and potentially most expensive ways to build your product, and then going towards the fastest. So the slowest is really just hand coding this. And so if you have a developer, a technical co-founder, you are a developer, or you hire a firm, if they are just building this from scratch and writing all the code by hand, up until a few years ago, that was the only way to do it. Nowadays, with all the vibe coding technology, which we're going to talk about within here, you can move a lot faster. And so hand coding it is going to be the slowest. This is also a function of how much knowledge you have on your platform and your frameworks. So for example, if you're hand coding and it's your first time using a whole new tech stack, that's going to take even longer because you have to really ramp up. If you've never done Stripe integration, if you've never used Next.js, if you've never done anything with Supabase, and that's how you're going to manage your database and your backend and all of that. If you're learning the environment and the framework and setting everything up from scratch for the first time, then this is absolutely going to be the slowest way that you could build this thing. And so if you have a development firm or a contractor that's done a bunch of product launches before, this could potentially go significantly faster because they may have a ton of the code in place and they may have built something similar to what we're going to talk about here as the fastest, which is the starter kit. They may have already built something like that, which we'll get to in a second. So aside from hand coding, the next fastest thing that you'll find is doing vibe coding. So vibe coding is where you're using AI tools to help you build the product. And so there are tools like Claude and Cursor and Lovable and all these other tools that allow you to use prompts, give information about what you want to build to an agent, and then that agent will take your prompt and will come up with a plan and will try to implement the code for you through a series of iterations. And this works phenomenally well. It can oftentimes produce high quality code. The problem is that as the system gets bigger and more complex, sometimes it goes off the rails. So you do have to have some level of technical expertise to be able to do this. You should ideally be a programmer that understands the code that is being generated, but it does allow you to oftentimes move fairly fast. The challenge is if you're starting from scratch, you're starting with absolutely nothing, then vibe coding from scratch means you're just potentially giving it a very broad prompt, like build me an app that exposes an API service. And with a broad prompt, you're going to get a lot of interpretation from the AI tool as to how to build it, what to build, what decisions to make. And so this is a good way of getting started, but typically what happens is that you get into this loop of, oh, that's not what I wanted, that's not what I wanted, that's not what I wanted. And so you're kind of incrementally having to tell it what you really want as it makes a series of mistakes, and this ends up being time consuming. As you could potentially guess, the next step is to do vibe coding with a detailed PRD, or a product requirements document. And if you've spent some time fleshing out exactly what you want to build and what the features look like, and maybe even getting into some of the technical aspects like what your database structure looks like or what your screens look like, it creates some boundaries and parameters so that it gets much closer to what you really want to build. So taking that to the next level, we have the product requirements document. You can vibe code with that. There's these other things that people are creating, and I'm going to just call them text companions. And so these text companions, I've actually released a few myself. And these are going to be like a big document that gives you a ton of insight into how to do something very specific. So for example, I've released a text companion. It's a huge 800-page guide on how to implement Stripe for a SaaS product. And this text companion is great because you give this alongside your PRD as context into your vibe coding tool. And then the vibe coding tool says, oh, I have this blueprint kind of for how to build a Stripe payment integration. Plus, I know from the PRD what the user wants to actually build, and then it takes all of that context and uses that to build towards the solution. And so this is absolutely great because it gives you a ton of context and useful information as to the right way of doing some specific thing, whether it's authentication, whether it's doing payment integration, whether it's database migrations, whatever. Ideally, you'll have a series of these companions, and that allows you to move significantly faster. Going even one level further is if you actually have real code, if you have functioning code that is designed as a companion. So it could be a piece of code that is an example from another project or something like that. If you feed that in and say, hey, I want to build this payment integration. And here's an example from another project of my payment integration. Now your vibe coding tool can go in and basically copy that code and port it over and maybe customize it based on your PRD or whatever. But that allows you to move even faster because it's not having to go through trial and error of implementing things and getting it wrong, right or wrong, and then having to rectify that. It just says, oh, this code already works. Let me literally copy this code, tweak it a little bit based on the current use case, and then get it to work. So that's an even faster way. So moving one step further than that is if you have what's called a starter kit, and a starter kit is basically the code. It's kind of like a code companion, and you could use it as a code companion, but it really what it does is if you are just starting to build your product, you can take the starter kit and you can use that as the frame of reference. So it is going to give you all the stuff that you need, like authentication and database integration and Stripe integration and all of those capabilities that you would need in a SaaS product, the 80% of stuff that you need. And then it's going to take that 80% and you're just going to configure it. So you don't even have to write code. You're basically just saying, this is my starting point. It is a code base that has the starting point for what I need. I'm going to take this and then I'm going to start implementing my functionality on top of that. And then you start vibe coding just your features. You don't have to build that 80% of the product with all of those capabilities that we talked about earlier. So a starter kit is going to be the fastest way if you take a starter kit and build on top of it. Of course, you could take the starter kit and also use it as a code companion, which is the next best thing. And so if you already have some code in place and you're like, hey, I have like 50% or 80% of what I want to build for V1 done, but I need to work out some details, or I want to do quota management or do payment integration or whatever that I don't already have, then you take the starter kit, import it into your project, say, hey, use this as a reference, use this as a code companion, and maybe here's some additional like text-based companions and some PRDs. Take all of that and use that as a reference, and then use that to integrate this code into my code base, and then you build on top of that. So these are the different ways that you can build an application, starting from kind of the slowest, which is really hand coding everything from scratch, and then add companions and requirements and existing code and all of that. You get into these like vibe coding options, and really the starter kit, if you build on top of it, you don't even have to write that 80% of your starting code. What you're doing is just taking that as the starting point and configuring the starter kit to do what you need. And so it's almost instantaneous. You just take it, configure it, and then build your features on top of it. So 80% of your product is already ready to go. And then you just focus on the 20% that you want to build features for. And you can use these techniques here, these vibe coding techniques here, to build that remaining 20% to get your V1 launch. If you're interested in working with me and a bunch of other engaged community members, make sure to jump into the SaaS User Growth Academy community. We've got a full course on how to build and grow a SaaS business that talks about what I went over today in more detail. And we also have weekly calls to give you personal help. It's a place where you can come get support while you're building your product and business. We have members who are actively working on their own SaaS products, as well as people who have had prior experience and success. I'd love to see you in the group. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.